Welcome. My name is Heather Richards. I'm a political scientist, professor here at Grand Rapids Community College, and I am honored to welcome our first speaker for the Diversity Lecture Series this year, Ana Navarro. We will just have a general conversation about some things that are going on politically right now before she goes and gives her talk. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm. So, today, there were a few bombs that went off in society, kind of some delivery of some bombs to CNN, I believe, and for former President Obama and Hillary Clinton. What is going on?
Look, I think, well, first of all, fortunately, the bombs did not go off,
Right.
but they were sent in the mail, explosive devices. And I think it's a sign of the times. I think it should be an alarm bell for our country and certainly for leaders who have a platform that we need to call for unity and we need to tamp down the rhetoric. We've seen that Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, John Brennan addressed to CNN, Eric Holder, George Soros, Maxine Waters all received such devices in the mail. I think it's no coincidence that each and every one of those have been a target of attacks, constant attacks by President Trump. He cannot continue to use the presidential bully pulpit to bully Americans and to incite violence and to promote discord and to sow division in America, create culture wars. That we just can't keep going this way. Somebody's going to wind up getting hurt. Today was a sad day for me. It touches me personally because it involved CNN. I saw images of many colleagues and friends of mine having to evacuate a building that I go in and out of constantly in New York, and that's just very sad that that's happening in America.
How do we change the rhetoric?
Look, I think it's got to start with Donald Trump. He is the leader of the free world. He has got the presidential bully pulpit. And he's the one that's leading these chants of lock her up, insults against Maxine Waters, calumnies against George Soros, attacks against CNN. He does it on Twitter. He does it constantly through rallies. He simply has got to stop. I hope that today is an aha moment, a wake-up moment for Donald Trump to realize that words do matter, and that what for him might be play acting, what for him might be entertaining his base, can lead to various serious consequences which could cost lives.
Mm-hmm. It's been reported that he's still going to go to his rally tonight.
And nothing stops a Trump rally, right? Not a hurricane, not explosive devices.
What has been identify currently as a Republican have for a really long time. You worked on the McCain campaign, and you for Jeb Bush as well. How has the president changed the identity of the Republican Party? Has he?
Oh, he absolutely has changed.
Is that an enduring change, do you think? That's one of the questions
I don't know if it's an enduring
asked.
change. It's definitely a change. He has. I think he's changed the Republican Party. I think he's changed the presidency. I think he's changed the country. He's changed the Republican Party in that a lot of people have changed what used to be and accommodated what used to be traditional Republican principles and values in order to work with this president. The Republican Party used to be the party of family values. Donald Trump is not family values. The Republican Party was against tariffs. It was about a strong foreign policy. What we see is a president who's more of an isolationist, who has imposed tariffs, who constantly and regularly attacks our allies and cozies up to dictators like we've seen with Kim Jong-un, like we've seen with the Saudis, like we've seen with Putin. I'm old enough to remember when Republicans were against Russian dictators who wanted to interfere in America.
That was only a few years ago, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think he's changed the presidency in that I'm not sure anybody else could get away with 5,000 lies in less than 2 years as president. He uses the presidency to promote his own properties, to promote his own brand, to promote himself. He uses the presidency to beat up on those that he disagrees with. He goes after people that disagree with him, even if they are of his own party. He has no qualms about going against a congressman or senator of his own party if they dare confront him. You know, he's changed the way we see the presidency, the way we perceive the presidency. I don't think that we expect the same moral fitness of a president that we once did. It used to be that the president was somebody that you would point to for your kids and say, you know, you too can grow up to be like this. And I think it's been a deterioration, a gradual deterioration, but he certainly put it through the precipice. And I think he's changed the country. We have, look, he didn't invent racism, he didn't invent division, but he certainly pandered to it, he's peddled to it, he's made it worse. And I think that racists out there and nationalists and supremacists out there feel emboldened.
Mm-hmm. So how do we talk to the next generation about this kind of age of incivility? It seems like we've kind of transformed. I was talking to students earlier and said, you know, I remember a time where nobody watched the presidential debates and nobody paid attention to what was going on in the communication from the president. And now it's every day, and people are tuning in. How is this the new normal?
I actually think that's a good thing. I think, I think people are much more politically attuned, politically engaged, politically informed, politically active than we had been even a short time past. And I think a lot of that is a direct result of the Trump presidency. I think the Me Too movement is a result of the Trump presidency. I have spoken to a lot of celebrities who led the charge against Harvey Weinstein, and with no exception, they've all told me that the election of Donald Trump, who had been credibly accused 15 plus times, was a catalyst for them not to remain silent and to take leadership on this issue. We see it in impromptu protests that happen all over the country. We see it. We're seeing it. And it's not just on one side, we're seeing it on both sides of the aisle, that there is a tremendous amount of interest and engagement in politics and in what is happening and in being part of the process.
Right. And just going along with that incivility, we also see it sometimes on the Democratic side too. Where protesters are confronting Mitch McConnell got cornered, and other politicians are getting cornered in restaurants and kind of being forced to leave. And you see the likes of, like Maxine Waters saying, we have to go in and then there's Michelle Obama. When they go low, we go high. So, what is the Democrats' response to this? Is there a good response, when you're getting and seeing this rhetoric all the time? How do you respond? Is it always turn the other cheek?
Part of the problem is there's really nobody that speaks for the Democrats, and they're all over the place in terms of messaging. Like you just pointed out, the message that you're getting from Michelle Obama is very different than the message you're getting from Eric Holder, for example, who says, when they go low, we kick them. So, you're seeing and you're hearing very different messages. Look, on the Democratic side, a lot of these protests, a lot of this heckling is organic. It is by activists. If we passed a law against heckling public officials in restaurants and in public places, it would be deemed unconstitutional by the courts. Well, maybe not by the Supreme Court anymore, but
maybe.
It would be. Yeah. We live in a country where there is freedom of speech, as long as it does not incite to violence. Right? You can't scream fire in a theater. You can't do things that will lead to chaos. So look, I think that I don't like it. I don't like it at all. I think that democracy gives us a very powerful vehicle to bring about change, and that is through elections and voting. And I hope that all those people who are heckling and screaming and protesting channel all of that into votes and into getting their friends and their family out there to vote and to canvassing, volunteering in campaigns, and being part of the democratic process. But I can also tell you that it is freedom of expression, and it is what makes us different from Saudi Arabia or Turkey or Cuba or Venezuela or Nicaragua. And so, we have an imperfect democracy, but it is what we have.
Mm-hmm. What do you see as some of the biggest challenges that we have in the United States today?
Oh, look, I think
as a Republican, oftentimes we see these two parties as polarized, and they are becoming much more polarized, especially in Congress. You're seeing an increase in party unity in voting on either side. How do we find that common ground on some of those issues that you find most important? So what would you view as the most important kind of domestic, let's start with domestic policies, that we should be focusing on, and where can we find some common ground on those?
There's a lot of policy issues that are important, right? Healthcare, immigration, gun control, climate change. We can go through a list of very important issues and challenges facing the country. What I think is the biggest challenge facing the country today is less about policy and more about culture. I think it is the inability to embrace diversity. And when I say diversity, I don't mean African American, Latino, woman, LGBTQ. When I say diversity, I mean diversity of thought. We have lost our ability to embrace diversity of thought. Way too often we are only speaking with and listening to and watching and consuming and reading things that we agree with, that already reaffirm what we believe. And we don't listen to people who bring different experiences and different life records than we do, and that come from different places. And that is a problem, because what you're seeing is people in the Midwest who don't understand rural African Americans, and rural African Americans who don't understand what's happening in the Rust Belt. And there's just this disconnect. I remember when we used to laugh, was it 2004? I can't remember now, but I remember when we used to laugh at John Edwards, who used to talk about two Americas. Well, we are two Americas right now. Maybe it's even more than two. It's not a laughing matter anymore. I wouldn't laugh at him if he said it now.
Yeah, and so some of those issues that you did mention, what is your perspective of what the Republican stance is on immigration, and does that match up to the President Trump?
Well, it's been first of all, right now, basically whatever President Trump believes is what the Republican Party accommodates and supports and rubber stamps. But that's not how it used to be. It wasn't too long ago, dinosaurs were not roaming the earth when George W. Bush was getting 44% of the Hispanic vote and was pushing immigration reform, a compassionate immigration reform, compassionate but fair immigration reform, which failed back then. What we see on immigration from President Trump is he tries to use it as a wedge issue. He tries to use it as a wedge issue to energize his base. He talks about this migrant caravan as a threat, a national emergency, a threat to the country. He lies about there being Middle Easterners, which is, a code phrase for terrorists within the caravan, with absolutely no evidence of such. And so, it's what he does, and it's his old playbook. It worked for him quite well in 2016, so why wouldn't he go back to a winning playbook in 2018?
Do you think it's going to continue to work for him?
I don't know, because I think in 2016 there were a lot of people who voted for President Trump, who voted for Donald Trump then, believing that the presidency would change him, believing that the magnificence and weight and responsibility of the office would somehow make him presidential and change him. Turns out he hasn't changed any. He has changed the presidency, but he has not changed any. And so, I wonder to myself what those kind of centrist independent voters who gave him a chance because they wanted something out of the box, because they didn't like Hillary Clinton, because they wanted a businessman, they wanted to shake up Washington, how they are going to react now in 2018. I'm also very interested in seeing what the women vote and what the people of color vote, what the minority vote ends up looking like. We saw that in Alabama, black women kept Roger Moore from becoming U.S. Senator. We're seeing right now that the gender gap between the two parties is 20+%. It is, and growing. And so I think there were a lot of people in 2016 who didn't like either choice and therefore sat it out, or maybe cast a vote for somebody else that was for a third party, for Jill Stein or for Governor Johnson. And, I wonder if 2016 was a lesson for the country that sometimes it is a binary choice. Yes. And that you only get one shot at the apple. If not, you're going to wake up with a political hangover that could very well last 4 years.
Very true. Yeah, I did just see some recent numbers before I came on here that the gender gap is up to 40 percentage points difference.
Really?
Yes, it jumped over 20 points.
Nationally?
Yes.
Wow.
That was on the Pew Research.
The last I saw was 22, so I mean that's basically doubled.
Yeah, they were rather alarmed by those changes, swings.
My God, I have a hard time believing.
I know.
If it's down to 40 points, I mean, he's got nobody but Ivanka and Melania left.
This is true, but nobody knows what they do behind the curtain when they close that shade and vote. And I think that's part of the problem too. I think that there's a lot of people who say one thing in exit polls and when they're queried, but when they get behind the screen, where does their gut go?
I don't even know why we bother polling anymore, because there's such a consistency of wrong polling. Mm-hmm. They might get the numbers right, but they get the turnout wrong. Mm-hmm. And so if you get the turnout wrong,
always matters. Yeah.
It completely changes the outcome.
Mm-hmm. I do think that we are seeing some pushback from in the gender perspective as a result of the Me Too movement, but more especially Kavanaugh, mm-hmm. The Kavanaugh confirmation. I think that was both a boost for the president's base, but it was also a signal to a lot of individuals out there that, speaking up doesn't always get the outcome that you want. And so there's a lot of undercurrent of anger out there. And I wonder if that's going to translate into votes for people.
We'll see. I think you're right. I think it energized both sides. My conservative women friends thought it was a prosecution of an innocent man for political purposes, or thought it was the crucifixion of Brett Kavanaugh. My other friends thought it was a sexual assaulter who got away with it and is now sitting in the highest court of the land. And I can tell you that both these groups were incensed and affected and torn and angry and frustrated by it. And so the question is, again, will that frustration, that angst translate into votes?
And then how do you move past that? I mean, one of the things we talk about with my students is the effect of social media on individual relationships. And I really think, setting the table on fire around Thanksgiving time, trying to talk about politics with family can be really dangerous. Students are there are some students I've said, how many of you were interested in politics, for a few years, and some hands went up. I said, well, are you still interested? And they're like, I don't know, it's really angry, a lot of very angry people out there, and some are put off by that, and others are, I'm ready to go. How do we transition from this anger and hostility and injustice on both sides to trying to find some middle ground? And do we have any politicians that are in Congress right now that can do that? I mean, John McCain seemed to be one of those final figures that could really
Most of
be.
the politicians who stand for that and who stood for that either lost their primaries, chose not to run again, or died. So there's very few left that have the gravitas, that have the guts, the moral compass to really be able to go past tribalism and call for middle ground and call for pragmatic solutions. I hope Mitt Romney will be that. I think he's got the freedom to. He's coming to the Senate past the age of 70. He's not going anywhere else. He's not going to run for president again. He's already rich. He's already famous. He comes from a state where he's going to get elected no matter what. So he really is free to exert his conscience and to talk about values. He's been doing that some during the campaign. I hope that he fills the very big shoes and huge void that was left by John McCain.
Yeah, that's the probably one of the bigger questions too, is if the president would run again in 2020, is there a better, more moderate Republican that might be able to challenge him? So somebody that might be able to bring the country together, that might garner support for Republicans. So I guess
I don't think there's a single Republican that could credibly challenge him. Right now, Donald Trump has almost 90% of Republican support. He has delivered for the base. He's gotten 2 Supreme Court nominees. He's renegotiated NAFTA. He has passed tax reform. He has done a lot of the things that he promised to do. He has turned back Obama regulations, which really angered Republicans. So he keeps the base happy. I don't think he could be credibly challenged in a Republican primary. And as far as the Democrats, they really got to get their act together. They got to get their message down. They got to get a candidate who can inspire, who can both inspire, unify, and go toe-to-toe with Donald Trump should he choose to run again. I frankly never underestimate the Democrats' ability to nominate a bad, mediocre candidate who cannot do that. So it's yet to see. I worry about what I see on the Democratic side because I see it resembling what happened with the Republicans in 2016, where everybody and their brother was running, and we ended up with the worst of the lot because while everybody else was trampling over each other's message, he had a clear lane.
You mentioned that on Twitter a couple of days ago, too, that Democrats shouldn't follow in the same path that the Republicans did and having too many people out there. Who do you think could be a front runner for the Democrats in 2020?
Look, I don't know, because I see, it's a different dynamic, but it's somewhat similar. I see so much distance in this and such a large spectrum within the Democratic Party. You see people who are as far to the left as an Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or a Maxine Waters and Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and then people who are as moderate as Connor Lamb or Bill Nelson in Florida, or frankly, at this point, even Hillary Clinton is a centrist moderate in the Democratic Party. And so they're going to have to figure it out because they're going to have such a choice, such a menu of candidates that come from the different angles and the different spectrum. I think and I hope that they would nominate somebody that can appeal to disenfranchised Republicans like me, to centrists and right-leaning independents who may have voted for Trump in 2016. Person I can think of that would do that, at least for me, would be a no-brainer, is Joe Biden. The question is, can Joe Biden pass muster with the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, or will he be stopped there yet again? This would be his 3rd time running for president, and I see people on the Democratic side wringing their hands about his age. Well, for the love of God, he'd be running against Donald Trump. He's not running against Brad Pitt.
Right. So, as a political strategist, what would be the policy approaches, the policy messages that you would like to see us come back and focus on in the 2020 election? What do you think?
Any policy. The 2016 election was ridiculously devoid of policy.
Yeah.
It was.
I'll tell you, some of my students want to know if you think legalizing marijuana at the federal level is going to be an issue in the 2020 election. We have to look. There are 9 states that now have it legalized for recreational use. And Canada. Yeah. So Michigan, we have it on the ballot this fall too to legalize it for recreational. There are several states that are moving forward. Medical marijuana.
I think it's going to be one of these issues.
I mean, look at John Boehner's.
Like gay marriage.
Yeah.
Where the states lead the country, you might end up with a Supreme Court case similar to gay marriage, where it gets brought to court because of the unequal treatment within the states. Because you can do it in one state and you can't do it in another state. Yeah, John Boehner's become quite the advocate, hasn't he?
Yeah, I never would have about 7 years ago, called John Boehner a moderate Republican or even remotely along those lines. But yeah, look at him. Oh, of course, there's some financial investment there too.
Well, I mean, there's some financial issues, but I always thought of John Boehner as a straight shooter, and I do think I think he wanted bipartisan solutions. He had a very difficult Republican conference to maneuver and to deal with, but I would pay money to see John Boehner back in action and back in the Republican Party, back as an elected leader, because he was an adult in the room, and he's likable.
Yeah, he is.
Yes, it's way too many jerks out there right now.
So we have probably the last question here. We've seen quite a bit of devastation with some major hurricanes, especially Puerto Rico and Florida. What do you see the Republicans? I've started to see kind of chatter about the Republicans kind of coming around on climate change, that they realize that maybe something has to be done. Do you think that you see a little bit of shift in the Republican Party? Is that something that young people that find it really important are going to be able to go to the Republican Party and know that they're going to represent their interests when it comes to climate change?
It's kind of like with gay marriage, where they are evolving way slower than the rest of the population. There's not enough recognition of science. There's not enough recognition of climate change. As a Floridian, I certainly hope so. As a South Floridian, I certainly hope so. Fortunately for me, I know how to swim and I have fins, but not everybody does. I think it's become an undeniable issue, and yet there's still people who deny it. Look, I live in a state where the Republican governor has banned the term climate change from all government literature. I'm not even making that up.
I know it sounds ridiculous. This is not something that
you can't make this stuff up.
Making up.
True. Yeah.
We are, in the state I'm in, we're going through a horrible environmental crisis with something called red tide and blue-green algae bloom. And there are still people that are denying that there are some man-made factors that have contributed to exacerbating these problems, and start somehow quoting the Bible. They think quoting Bible verses will fix it. I'm pretty sure God is saying, thanks for quoting the Bible verses, but you know what? Fix the planet I gave you.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, is there anything else that you'd like to contribute? I think we covered quite a bit in this conversation.
I always love being in Michigan because you guys are just so darn nice.
I don't know if my students would all necessarily agree with that, but it was a pleasure talking to you. And I look forward to your talk tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.